Mr. Chesnoff, I've been emailing her, and I just heard Mr. Chesnoff leave a message saying that this should have been taken care of before, etc. But obviously, I don't have that information, and it's information that I'm entitled to.
I will be surprised. I will be surprised and upset if you don't have it by today.
Okay, good.
The next issue is, the court had originally said, when it looked like we were going to be going till further into August, that the defense needed to indicate by the end of July if they were going to have a replacement for Dr. Altshuler. Now the problem with that is that they're due to start potentially before that deadline occurs, and I need to be able to prepare to know what that person is going to testify to, whether it's relevant, etc. So I'm going to ask the court to move the deadline up until this Monday. And even then, that's still not a whole lot of notice.
Mr. DeGuerin, seems reasonable enough.
We have no plans to replace Dr.
There you go.
Altshuler at this time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Finally, Your Honor, I just want to make sure,
And other than Dr. Altshuler and potentially the defendant's testimony, if he chooses to testify, are there any other defense witnesses that we need to be aware of?
Well, we've been hearing about another witness. That's Dr. Elizabeth Loftus.
you said
I'm
addition-
sorry.
Oh.
Other than Loftus and possibly the defendant, is there anybody else?
Mike Yoshida.
Who?
Mike Yoshida is an architect that was working on the townhouse in San Francisco.
I remember that. Yes,
we don't have any discovery from him.
there was a mention of this architect in earlier testimony.
Well, we need discovery, we need contact information.
Okay, address the court. I don't want to have your dialogue on the record.
I'm sorry, Your Honor?
Address the
I don't
court.
want your dialogue on the record. Address the court.
Oh, okay. Your Honor,
Please.
we're requesting that this is the first we've heard of this witness, other than they've mentioned and they've never said they're going to call him. And we have no discovery, no contact information, no report, zero.
So we have, the defense has expressed an intention to call this witness there, and because we are now, it is, ordinarily it would be 30 days before trial. We are in trial. Apparently some issue has arisen that you want to address with testimony from Mr. Yoshida. He must have made statements to you in anticipation of this. Please, and I'm going to order you to turn that over to the defense.
Your Honor,
To the people.
can the defense very briefly tell the court what the offer of proof is for Yoshida? Because my concern is that potentially it's going to involve some kind of hearsay where they are going to try and get Mr. Yoshida to provide information that Mr. Durst said X or...
You're speculating. They'll give you discovery. I've ordered it. When you see the discovery, then you can make a
Okay.
motion.
The final issue, Your Honor, is that with respect to the clips that are going to be playing, I know I've said this in chambers, I think it's been on the record, but I just want to make sure that we've stipulated to the authentication and to the foundation. Unfortunately for the defense, under California law, they cannot bring in any of Mr. Durst's statements unless there is an exception, and the only one that I think would potentially allow any statements to come in would be Evidence Code Section 356, which you've already filed a motion on, and that is very narrowly tailored. So I just want to make sure they're aware that if they are planning on bringing in a bunch of clips that we don't play of those interviews, they can't do it. And I want to litigate that in advance. I don't want that simply brought up either through Mr. Durst when he testifies or on their own when we're doing the stipulation. They need to file a motion and they need to indicate what statements they want to bring in.
I would require that if that's your plan.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor.
Thanks, Your Honor.
And then, Your Honor, we made a request, which I don't know if it's been told to the prosecution, but while these videos are being played, Mr. DeGuerin and Mr. Durst Mr. Durst is gonna waive his appearance to watch video.
Okay.
And be working with Mr. DeGuerin.
No objection, Your Honor.
I will need a written waiver executed in open court by Mr. Durst. Has he done that?
I didn't put it in writing. I misunderstood, Your Honor. I thought you would just ask him if he waives his presence, but we'll write it out right now.
No, because the county is still has a motive to fabricate a separate.
Sorry, Your Honor, I misunderstood.
It's the statute, 977B
Yes, no,
requires that.
I understand.
You know, was the court's plan with respect to, so we've got, how long are our two today? I think
2 hours and 45 minutes.
3:45?
2:45.
2:45. No,
2 hours and 45 minutes.
2 hours.
45 minutes. Your Honor, I guess we would request, it's going to be very close, that potentially we'd like to get finished both. It's 2 hours and 45 minutes. We're right now very close to that point.
So you want to go past 12?
It might be 5 minutes. I don't know how soon we're starting, but we're,
Will that infringe on your travel plans?
No, Your Honor, if it's only 10, 15 minutes, we're good. If
Let me ask our staff.
thank you. That's what I wanted to ask, Your Honor.
If we went into the lunch hour 10 to 15 minutes and then we were done for the day, not returning, would that be all right with you?
It's fine with me.
Is that all right with you? Is that all right with you?
I'm fine, but I'll return.
Okay, that's fine. Deputy Washington, okay with you?
We have it.
Thumbs up.
Thank you, Your Honor.
That's right. That's why I didn't want to say yesterday, 12 o'clock, because you don't want to, I tried to under-promise.
Under-promise, over-deliver.
Yeah. All right, I've received what appears to be a 977B waiver for July 21.
That's when darkened because of your watching.
Yep. All right, Mr. Durst, I saw you execute this waiver. I will accept this waiver of your presence today so you may confer with your counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay.
Take this with you. Your Honor, does the court prefer that Mr.
No,
Durst-
you're excused, Mr. Durst.
Okay. Have a good day, Bob. Chris, if I can hear you, I'll text you. Do you have transcripts of these two?
Welcome back to Department 1, People versus Robert Durst. Our jurors and alternates all are present. I've given Mr. Durst permission to be absent today, and Mr. Chesnoff is present representing him. Mr. DeGuerin is here also. We have Mr. Henderson and Mr. Bailey and present for the people. Ladies and gentlemen, I understand we're going to see video recordings of conditional examinations. We've got getting a little bit of a late start, so we're going to go a little bit past 12, but not much past 12. If that's all right with you, then you'll all be done for the day, and you'll be excused at that point. So with that, Mr. Henderson, you may begin. What are you presenting?
I'd like to mark as People's 261. It's
with the 57-minute conditional examination of Julie Smith and mark the transcript as 261A.
Thank you.
I have 7 spare copies. The audio is pretty good and the subtitles. We read your-
And Mr. DeGuerin, you are excused to be with your client.
Four left. Playing People's 260, testimony of Julie Smith.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly state that the testimony about to give in the trial now pending before this court should be the truth, and all the truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please be seated.
What's your follow-up this time?
I'm having a hard time hearing, so can you speak up just a little bit?
Will you place your Bible to the other side?
Sure.
There you go. Yes. Okay.
Please state and spell your first and last name.
My name is Julie Smith, Juliesmith.
Thank you.
Woman, you may proceed.
Ms. Smith, what is your current age?
I beg your pardon?
Your current age.
73.
And can you please tell me what you do for a living?
I'm a writer and publisher.
And how long have you been in that profession?
Since about 1980.
And how many books have you written?
I think 22 at this point.
When was your last book?
It was about 3 weeks ago.
And you said that you're a publisher.
I am.
What is the difference in terms of between writing and publishing? What is publishing?
A writer, there's all kinds of different ways to be a writer. You can publish your own work, or you can publish with people in New York, or you can publish with a small publisher. And I am a small publisher. So what I do is I publish other people's work and also my own right now. So that means that I have to do every part of the process of getting that book into production and getting it publicity and getting it sold.
So the difference between a self-publisher and what you do is you also publish other people's.
I do.
And what kind of education do you have?
I went to the University of Mississippi, where I earned a BA in journalism.
Did you ever work as a journalist?
For about, I would say 15 or 16 years.
And what area of journalism did you work in?
Excuse me?
What area of journalism did you work in?
What area of journalism? I've worked as a copy editor, but I was most often a reporter. I started out in the women's section of the San Francisco Chronicle when it was still called that. And later I went on to general assignment. And I did cover the courts for a year.
And does that mean as a reporter, did you actually write stories for the papers and for the magazines that you worked for?
For the paper.
Can you tell me, when I say the name Susan Berman, is that someone you're familiar with?
Can you say that a little louder?
Susan Berman? Susan Berman, is
No,
that...
I heard her name.
Oh, okay, is that someone you're familiar with?
Yes, I was very close friends with Susan for about 30 years before she died.
And if you can remember, how and where did you meet Susan?
How we met? Yes, I was working for the Chronicle, and I was then on the court beat. And she came to work as a new reporter on what was then the rival paper, the Examiner. And she was assigned for one day, someone was sick or something, she was assigned to the court beat. And she had no idea what to do. And so she was almost in tears, and she asked me to help her, although I was on the route of the paper. And so I did, and we became close friends.
And back at that time, this would have been approximately over 30 years, around 1970 then?
I guess it was.
How often would the two of you see each other back then?
We saw each other pretty frequently when she was living in San Francisco, actually quite a bit, and then she moved. And we didn't see each other for a period while she was in New York. And when she went back to LA, I went to visit her quite often.
And how often would the two of you talk?
We talked a lot. Maybe once every couple of weeks or once a month or something like that. Or we would spend a week together.
If I were to ask you to describe Susan's personality, how would you describe her?
Well, she was an extremely complex person. She was difficult. She was really smart. She could be a lot of fun. But she wasn't easy. She was a very twisty and turny kind of friend. She was someone who could call and be terribly upset and you would have to take care of her, but then she would take care of you sometime.
So is it fair to say, if I were to ask you to describe, in terms of high maintenance or low maintenance friends,
It was pretty high maintenance.
when I say the term phobias in Susan Berman, is that anything that rings a bell for you?
Susan had more phobias than she had fingers and toes, probably. Actually, that's not true. There were probably only 4 or 5, but they were very strong, and they were uppermost in her mind. And she couldn't stand heights. She couldn't stand elevators. She couldn't stand bridges, or all kinds of things.
If I were to ask you, what was she like in terms of her sense of personal security?
She could even be a little paranoid. She was pretty wary.
You said that Susan was high maintenance, but she gave a lot back. Was she a supportive friend?
A very supportive friend.
And if I were to ask you, how loyal a friend was Susan, if you were a friend?
She would, I don't know if she would die for you, but just about everything else. She was as loyal a friend as you can get.
If I were to ask you, was Susan a completely honest person?
Susan told stories. She had kind of a casual relationship with truth in some ways. She liked to tell stories that made her sound important. And she definitely liked to show her friends in a good light.
I want to ask you, the Susan that you know, and I'm just talking about in general, to get more specific later, but with the Susan Berman I know, would she lie to protect a close friend?
Absolutely. I'm pretty sure she did.
Were you acquainted with Susan's other friends?
Some of them, yes, quite a few of them.
Did you know Lorraine Newman yourself?
I didn't, no.
Do you know if she was a close friend of Susan's?
Susan talked about her a lot, and I think that they were friends, but probably not as close as Susan would have liked to think or liked us to think.
What about Susan Harmon?
Susie Harmon was a close friend. Yes, I knew Susie.
Do you know Linda Oakes at all?
No.
Robin Morse?
No, I don't.
I assume you've never spoken to these women, is that?
I have not.
When I say the name Robert Durst, is that a name, or Bobby Durst, is that a name you're familiar with?
Very.
And how are you familiar with that?
I think that I first heard his name when Susan and I were in New York together. I think I had taken her there. I mean, I did take her there. I think it was that week. Because she was undergoing a sort of a trauma, a really bad thing had happened to her, and she wanted to see her shrink. And so as we were in New York, she told me that I would meet her friend Bobby Durst. And she told me some things about him, and that they had been close friends at UCLA.
And when she referred to Bobby Durst, how close of a friend did she represent him to be to her?
She represented him as an extremely good friend.
When she described him to you, did she mention anything about his wealth or his family's power?
His wealth? Yes, she did. Susan did describe people that way. She would, if somebody was wealthy or famous or anything like, or accomplished, she was always going to say that.
And was that something, so in other words, was the way you found out that Mr. Durst had money and was from a powerful family, did you ask that question or did she volunteer?
Oh, she volunteered. No, you didn't have to ask.
If I were to ask you, did Susan love Bobby Durst?
She did. She told me she did. As a dear friend.
And have you in the past stated that he was her friend no matter what? She was that good friend?
I did.
Does that accurately describe the relationship as Susan represented it to you?
Yes, it does.
Did you ever meet Bobby Durst in person?
Yes, I've met him several times.
And do you remember, was one of those times at Susan's wedding to Mr.?
Yes, I was one of the wedding guests, and so was Bobby, and Susan asked him if he would drive me to the wedding, and he did.
And can you describe, to the best of your memory, what was that interaction?
What was that interaction like? It was really awkward and stilted. He and I were alone in the car together, and he absolutely wouldn't talk to me. I would try to be pleasant and friendly, and he did not respond.
Now, I'm going to cover this later, but did you end up, either before or after that, observe Mr. Durst in situations where he was able to interact with individuals?
Oh, sure, yeah.
And in the interaction you had with him in the car, how did you take that interaction?
I thought he was terribly rude and was not interested in expending any energy at all and being polite to a person he found unimportant.
Was it your belief at the time that Mr. Durst was unable to interact with you, or in essence, just didn't find you important or interesting enough to do so?
I thought he was certainly able to interact and just couldn't be bothered.
Did you have the opportunity to ever meet Kathy Durst?
I didn't.
When I say the name Nick Chabon, do you know who that is?
Yes, I know Nick Chabon.
And can you describe how close Susan Berman was to Nick?
They were extremely close. Very good friends.
Were you aware if Nick Chabon was also acquainted with Robert Durst?
Was friends with Bobby Durst? Is that
Yes.
Yes, they were. I believe Susan may have introduced them.
And did you actually have the opportunity to see Bobby Durst, Susan Berman, and Nick Chabon interacting together?
Yes. The four of us were together once, and the three of them were just having a wonderful time, laughing, joking, and obviously knew each other very well. They kind of left me out of it. But they were clearly very good friends and having a super time.
And did it appear to be a situation when you observed the three of them, Nick, Bobby, and Susan, did it appear to be kind of like a very close three-way friendship, or was there like a third wheel? In other words, as you watched them interact, did it appear that all three were close to, each of the three were close to each other?
I did.
When I bring up Kathy Durst's disappearance, that's something you're familiar with, is that correct?
Kathy, I missed one word. Kathy Durst.
I should just clarify, you have a hearing issue, correct?
Yes,
And so some of the questions I'm asking, it's a little hard for you to hear me.
that is correct. That's why I asked you to repeat.
How did you find out that Kathy Durst had disappeared?
How did I find out Kathy Durst had disappeared? It was well after the fact, and it was on that trip when I took Susan to New York, I believe, and she told me about it. When she told me about her friend Bobby, she said that his wife had disappeared. It was a pretty amazing thing to hear. And I asked her if she thought he killed her. And she said, absolutely not. I don't think that.
Let me ask you, when did that conversation take place?
It took place on that occasion that, as far as I can remember, when I took her to New York, it was obviously Kathy Durst had already disappeared. I can't remember, I don't know exactly what year that was. It was right after her ex-husband had died.
I'm sorry, right after Mr. died?
Yes.
So it would have been sometime, would you agree, in the mid-80s? Does that sound
Yes,
right?
that sounds right.
Did you attempt to ask Susan specifically about Kathy's disappearance? Did you?
Of course.
And when you asked her, what was her response?
She told me as much about it as she, I presume, wanted me to know, just everything that I probably could have read in the newspaper. And I did say, do you think that Bobby killed her? She said, no, I don't, no, he absolutely didn't. I believe she called it the Durst organization, like it was much. She said, I think that they did it. And then she said, as if it was a warning, she said, Julie, promise me this. You can't ever write about this. Never write about this.
Let me ask you, has she ever said that to you about any other issue or event in the years you knew her?
No.
And during this conversation you had with her, did she tell you that she made clear to you that she did not ever want to talk to me about anything that had to do with Bobby and Kathy?
During that conversation? I don't believe during that conversation she did. But any time that I tried to bring it up, she would just veer off in another direction. She wouldn't talk about it at all.
In fact, did you previously say when you were interviewed in 2012 by Andy Director and Mark Swerling, do you remember speaking to them about Susan's response to questions about Kathy's disappearance?
Do I remember speaking to Mark Swerling? Yes.
Do you remember speaking to them about specifically Susan's response when you would ask about Kathy's disappearance?
I don't know what you're referring to.
You know, I'm going to play JS020. This is from the August 12, 2012 interview with Mr. Director and Mr. Smurley. It's at page 37. They're not dates. They're not headlines.
So this is 112. 112. There's no transcript? Where is it? 112. Okay. Thank you.
Susan did not ever want to talk to me about anything that had to do with Bobby and Kathy. That was part of the whole secrecy thing.
Okay.
She just didn't go there. She just didn't.
Is that you?
That's me.
And does that accurately depict your memory of what would happen when the subject of Kathy's disappearance would come up?
It does.
And let me ask you, was Susan the kind of person who, in your conversation with her, was she always a talkative, pretty free with information?
Yes. She was about as voluble as you could get. If she called you, you better make sure you had about an hour.
So is it fair to say that not only did she not hesitate to disclose information, you couldn't shut her up most of the time?
That's correct.
Is there any other subject in the 30 years that you knew her where she made clear to you she did not want to talk about other than Kathy Durst's disappearance?
Not that I can recall. No.
Did you find out that there was a reinvestigation into Kathy's disappearance?
I did. I saw a piece in the New York Times about it. I don't remember where I was living, but it wasn't in Los Angeles where she was. So I called her about that.
And what was her reaction, if you can remember, to the reinvestigation?
She didn't talk about it. She brushed it off. She said, "Oh, Julie, I don't want to talk about that."
Do you remember previously relating in an interview with Detective Camacho on February 17th, 2015, that in addition to not talking about it, what she said was, "Oh, Julie, it's terrible."
Yes, she said that. She said it's terrible what they're trying to do.
Did she expound upon that at all?
She wouldn't.
When I say the name Niall Brenner, is that someone that you are familiar with?
Yes.
Did you ever meet Niall Brenner?
I met him, I believe, for the first time at Susan's memorial service.
And what had Susan said to you about Niall Brenner prior to you meeting her?
Before.
Meeting her, excuse me.
You know, to have several hours. She talked about Niall Brenner quite a bit. She met him, I think, while walking her dogs, and they became friends. She had a huge crush on Niall Brenner, who was not interested in her as a girlfriend, but he became, I think she called him a manager or something, but I don't quite get what that meant, because she was a writer, and writers don't usually have managers, but he did some kind of function for her.
Was it your understanding from Susan that the reason Niall was not interested in her was that he was gay?
That's right.
And did Susan easily accept this reality?
She did not. She wouldn't accept it at all. She kept telling Niall, and this is what she told me, she would tell Niall all the things that were wrong with him.
Were you aware that Susan ended up coming on hard times financially?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Were you aware that Susan came upon hard times financially?
Absolutely. That actually lasted many years.
And when is the first time that you recall that?
That she was running out of money?
Yeah,
That went on for years.
let me go back. When you first met her, is it fair to say that financially speaking, Susan appeared to have plenty of money?
She was loaded. Yeah, she had money from inheritance. She was working, and later she sold, and she had sold some books, but later she sold one of her books to, she sold film rights to the book, and evidently sold them, just sold them. She didn't, they weren't optioned. So she had a lot of money.
And is it fair to say that at a certain point in time in your relationship, that situation switched, and over time she became more and more financially desperate?
That is quite fair to say.
And would she talk to you about this financial desperation?
Did she talk to me about it?
Yes.
Oh, yes. I mean, there were times when she would talk about whether she had enough money to buy food or not. Oh yes, she talked about it a lot.
If I were to ask you, how generous of a person was Susan with her own money?
How generous
Yes.
was she?
Yes.
I found her very generous.
It had previously stated, Striker. Were you aware that her housing situation had deteriorated after she lost the house in Brentwood?
Yes, she lost her house, and then she moved into, I think it was in Benedict Canyon. There was a little cottage where she had lived before. And that cottage was in disrepair.
Do you recall in between, previously relating, that between the time she lost her house and the time she moved back into Benedict Canyon Cottage, that she had stayed in a friend's condo who'd been very gracious enough to let her stay there?
Yes, her name was Nina something, I think, yes.
And was there a point in time where Susie related to you that this woman wanted her condo back?
That she said what?
That Susan related to you that this woman wanted her condo back?
Yes, it
And
was.
what do you remember about that situation, what Susan told you?
Susan was very upset. She didn't think she should have to give it back, as I recall. And I believe that the friendship may have ended as a result.
Did you ever visit her in Benedict Canyon?
I did.
And when you visited her there, we've talked about 2 different times she lived there. I'm talking about the second time. Is that what you're referring to?
I don't think I was there the second time until after she died.
Did you end up going to her place in Benedict Canyon after she was murdered?
After she died, yes. I did. I was the executor of her will, and I went in to help clean it out, and also to make an inventory, as I was required to do.
Can you describe the conditions that she was living under? Did those surprise you at all?
They didn't surprise me because she had told me, but it was really a pretty desperate situation. She had almost no furniture left. Somehow, I think maybe that place had carpets, and somehow the carpets had been pulled up and the floors were, just like you might imagine, they were awful. Just, they were unfinished. It was really a pretty desperate thing.
And has Susan told you that she had sold clothes?
That she had sold clothes?
Her own clothes.
I don't recall that.
Let me play JS002 from the 8/12/2012 interview, page 17. People's napkin over there.
113.
Thank you.
113.
002.
She ran a person that she had lived in before. I can't hear it.
Yes.
All right, that's my fault.
Benedict Canyon. She ran a place in Benedict Canyon that she had lived in before, actually. At one time, and it was quite cute. And she sold so many things. I'm trying to remember what she did. She sold her clothes, she sold her jewelry, she sold tons of things, and she had hardly anything left by the time she died.
Does that refresh your recollection?
Yes, it does. Yes.
Does
And
that,
I went through her closet. I do recall that she was missing a lot of things.
and does that accurately describe the condition that she was living in?
Yes.
Did you ever loan her money yourself?
No, she never asked me for money.
Were you aware if she had borrowed money from Bobby Durst?
Yes, I was.
And had you ever discussed that with her?
Yes, it came in the context of she would be so worried about how she would get money, and then I can't really recall whether he offered or whether she asked, but she certainly talked to him about the same things and was very open about that. And he did lend her money on 2 occasions that I knew of.
And let me ask you, do you recall Susan discussing with you in advance the best ways to hit up Bobby for money?
I recall that we had the conversation, but I don't really remember what we said.
JS003, Your Honor.
Yes. People's 114 and 114A, video and transcript respectively.
I think I recall her saying, I think she may have asked my advice. Should I ask you for money? I have no idea what I said. But she was really down on her luck, and she said, I just don't know how I can get any money, but I think that my friend probably would lend me some money. And should I ask him? I may have said, yeah, I guess you should. I didn't see how she was going to get me money. And he did. He lent her the money, and then she asked him again.
Did Susan later tell you that, in fact, Bob Durst had come up with $25,000?
Did she tell me that? What?
Did she tell you, subsequent to that conversation, that, in fact, Bobby Durst had given her $25,000?
She did.
Do you remember when your last contact with Susan was, either in person or by phone?
Yes, I do remember. because it was that conversation. It was that conversation in which I called her about the New York Times article, I believe. And I said I had seen it and she didn't want to talk about it.
When you say the New York Times article regarding...
The one about the case being reopened.
Do you remember when this conversation would have been, to the best of your memory?
I would say, well, yes, it was the week before she died. Maybe 2 weeks before, but it was that December.
And how did you hear about Susan's murder?
How did I hear about Susan's death?
Yes.
Yes, there was actually a series of calls that I missed and this happened because I was on vacation. And finally, I was able to connect with Susie Harmon, who had called to tell me, and Susie did.
Susie's the one who told you that Susan
Yes.
had been murdered?
Yes.
Did you go to Susan's funeral? I'm dividing and separating the funeral from the memorial. Did you go to the funeral?
I didn't go to the funeral, I went to the memorial service. The funeral happened while I was away, actually.
And when you went to the memorial service, did you run into Nick Shaven there?
I did.
And can you describe what was Nick like in terms of his emotions at the memorial?
He was extremely agitated. He was not somebody that I knew very well, and he seemed to seek me out, and he wanted to ask me, he wanted to ask me if Susan ever told me that she knew Bobby killed Kathy. If Susan ever asked me, ever told me that Bobby killed Kathy. And she had not. And Nick was extremely wound up and very, very agitated, seemed to be going through something. And he said that she had told him that.
Ben, you and I spoke, you spoke to Detective Camacho on February 17, 2015, is that correct?
Yes.
And by the way, on that phone call, do you recall if you spoke to me with Detective Camacho, or was it just Detective Camacho?
I don't recall.
I want to play, one moment, sorry. During that interview with Detective Camacho, you were asked specifically about this conversation with Nick Chavin, is that correct?
This conversation with Nick Chavin, yes.
And do you specifically recall, as you sit here right now, what you said to Detective Camacho about that conversation?
Yes. I said that Nick had sought me out and come over to me and begun the conversation by asking if Susan had said that Bobby killed Kathy. And then I must have asked if she had told him that, and he said yes. She said, Bobby is our friend and we love him, and we just have to overlook that, but Bobby killed Kathy.
You know, at this point, I'm going to play JS027 as a prior consistent statement. This is a statement that the witness is making prior to coming to court, which supports her testimony. I'm doing this in the interest of time. Obviously, it's going to be admissible a number of ways. I think this is the most efficient way to do it, as we're at conditional examination anyway.
115, 115A.
Thank you, JS027. This is February 17, 2015.
The memorial service, he, to my surprise, approached me. I didn't even think he'd remember me, but he did. And we had this conversation. I think he was trying to wrap his brain around the fact that Bobby had killed Susan. He kept saying, didn't she say to you that Bobby killed Kathy? And I said, no, she didn't.
Nick Chabin?
Very well, very vividly.
And I'm going to continue asking questions about that conversation, but if I were to say to you, on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being, you know what, I don't remember the content of that conversation with Nick Chabin hardly at all, and 100 being, I will never forget the content of that conversation with Nick Chabin, where would you be?
I'm going to give that 100.
And I'm also going to play JS028. By the way, I don't think I said on 027, I should have. That was page 21, lines 20 through 26. Of the February 17, 2015 transcript. This is JS028, February 17, 2015, page 22, lines 7 through 10.
116, 116A.
And he said, well, she said to me, she said, you know that Bobby killed Kathy, and we can't ever tell anybody, but we know that because we love him.
Do you recall that, ma'am?
Very well.
And you are repeating what Nick was telling you Susan had told him. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Your Honor, I want to play JS016. This is from the August 12, 2012 interview with Mark Scully and Andy directly, page 31.
117, 117A.
They did have a conversation with Nick Chabin. Nick was upset. We were all upset. We were missing Susan. And we were, emotions were very high. And he said, he may have said, did she ever tell you that she thought Bobby killed Kathy? And I said, no, the opposite. And that may have been how the conversation got started. I don't really recall how it got started. But he said, she told me that he did it. She said, we all love Bobby. We love Bobby. And we're just going to have to overlook this or something along that way. And I don't know, I remember him sort of pounding his fist or something, saying, I remember her saying this. I remember her saying this really well. And I thought it was really significant that she had said that to him. Because she certainly didn't say it to me. And she wouldn't have said it to anybody that wasn't a good friend of Bobby's. She thought it was safe.
Ma'am, is that an accurate depiction of what Nick Chabin said to you in response to him during that conversation at the memorial?
That's very accurate.
Ma'am, you previously testified that Susan Berman never mentioned to you anything having to do with Bob having any involvement in Kathy Durst's disappearance. Is that correct?
After that first conversation that I told you about, she didn't.
And is it also true that Susan Berman never mentioned to you anything about providing an alibi for Mr. Durst with respect to Kathy's disappearance?
That is correct. She never mentioned anything like that.
Is it correct that she never mentioned to you having called the dean of the medical school after Kathy was dead, pretending to be Kathy?
That is correct.
Let me ask you something. How well did Susan know you and your values and who you were as a person?
We were really close. She knew me very well.
I want you to assume for a moment that Susan had possessed information that Bobby Durst had murdered his wife. And I want you to further assume that she had assisted him by providing a false alibi. So I want you to assume those two things. Do you understand? Do you understand?
I do understand.
Would you expect, given the nature of your relationship, that she would have admitted that to you?
She would not have admitted that to me. She would have withheld that from me.
And how certain are you of that opinion?
How certain am I of that? Completely certain.
And what do you base that on, ma'am?
I think that she knew me well enough to know that I would have a great deal of judgment about that. and that I would feel it was something I had to report to the police.
And in fact, had Susan, I want you to pretend right now, knowing yourself, had Susan said to you, I provided Bob Durst with a false alibi, what would you have done?
I would have called the police.
And if I were to ask you on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being I don't know and 100% being uncertain, how certain are you that Susan would have known that that would have been your reaction?
I would say about 98%.
Ma'am, do you recall speaking to Detectives Coulter and Stevens back in 2001?
Yes, very, very vividly.
And ma'am, do you recall telling Detectives Coulter and Stevens back then that the whole conversation with Nick Chapin at the memorial?
Yes. I'm even trying to think I may have contacted them about that because, no, we had an appointment to meet the day after. And yeah, I thought it was extremely significant. And I told them in detail.
I just want to be clear. So back in 2001, you stated to the Los Angeles Police Department that Nick Chapin had approached you and had, in essence, said to you that Susan told me Bobby killed Kathy, but we have to protect him. Kathy's gone, in essence.
That is correct.
So, Mr. Bailey is saying that, can you just repeat this? So, you told the LAP detectives that at the funeral, Nick Chapin had come up to you and said Susan Berman had previously said to him, I know Bob killed Kathy.
Yes, I told the detectives that Nick Chapin came up to me and said that Susan told him that she knew Bobby killed Kathy.
Ma'am, after Susan was murdered, you ended up being the executor for her estate, is that correct?
That is right.
And what did you do in reference to being the executor?
I had 2 or 3 duties, I believe, and one was to make an inventory of all her belongings, which I did. There was hardly anything left. There were no old book contracts or anything like that. There was so many things just weren't there. And then she had a safe deposit box, which I went with her son to clear out, and it contained trinkets. There was nothing valuable anywhere. So that was the first job. I had to do the inventory, and oh yes, and I had to find the will, and there were a number of wills, but we found the latest one.
In terms of the value of her estate, were you able to comply with the terms of her will and distribute the monies that she had talked about, or was there?
There was nothing. There were debts.
Did you find any unpublished manuscripts while going through her stuff?
And there might have been a screenplay, something like, something about gambling, but I didn't find anything aside from that.
Have you spoken to the media in this case over the years?
I have. Immediately after her murder, I spoke to probably a number of people, and then there was Mark Smerling from the Jinx.
Let me ask you, ma'am, have you had any desire in this case to, quote, get your 15 minutes of fame?
To do what?
Get your 15 minutes of fame.
That's the last thing I wanted. No.
Ma'am, when I say all good things, is that a movie you're familiar with?
I'm begging pardon.
All Good Things. Is that a movie you're familiar with?
Yes, that was the movie that Mark Sperling and Andrew Jarecki made about Bobby Durst.
Yes, that was the fictionalized
The
version.
fictionalized version. And Kathy.
Did you see the movie?
I did.
And did you also see the Jinx?
Yes, I did.
And have you also read various articles about this case?
And books. Yes, I've read everything I could about it.
And I want to ask, if I were to say to you, how confident are you that the information you provided today is from your firsthand knowledge? What you heard from Susan, what you heard from Nick, versus what you might have read in the papers or seen on television or seen in the movies?
I'm 100% confident.
When I say the name David Feckheimer, which I believe, I might need some help from the defense on this, I think it's Fechheimer.
Fechheimer.
When I say that name, is that a name you're familiar with?
Yes, I know David Fechheimer.
Oh, is it Fechheimer or Feckheimer?
I think it's Fechheimer.
Fechheimer, okay. And
I don't know him well, since I'm not that sure.
who is Mr. Fechheimer?
He is, he's a private investigator. I met him first when I lived in San Francisco and worked for the Chronicle, and also after I became an author, because he was involved in a sort of a fan organization. I must have had some involvement with him on news stories as well, but we certainly knew each other in those days.
And did you become aware that Mr. Fechheimer was involved in this case?
I did. The way that I became aware of that is he called me one day in New Orleans, and he said, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, you know, I just happened to be in New Orleans, and I wonder if I can take you to lunch." I have to tell you that immediately I felt very suspicious that he had been hired by the defense.
Let me stop you.
Okay.
Did he tell you, before you proposed lunch, that he was an investigator working for Mr. Durst?
No, he did not.
And in the course of your conversation, did that appear to you to be something that just didn't come out in the conversation, or did it appear to you to be something that was being withheld?
Well, he did tell me during lunch, but yes, I felt he withheld it to get me to come to lunch.
And did Janet go to lunch with him?
Yeah,
And did you find out that in fact he was working for Mr. Durst?
I did.
And at lunch, did at some point he let you know, hey, this isn't to talk about old times in San Francisco?
I think I let him know that. The minute he said, "I'm working for Dick DeGuerin," I said, "Well, I did suspect that, and that I can't talk about it."
And did you guys speak at all anymore about the case?
Not really. I think he may have told me some stories. He may have, but we didn't talk about the case to speak of.
When you say he might have told you some stories, to the best of your memory, what is it that he said to you?
What is it he said to me? About this case in particular,
Yes.
or about the people involved?
Yes.
I don't really think he said anything. I said I don't think he said anything.
You mentioned a moment ago that you believe that he had said something about the case. And then when I asked again, he said, I'm not sure he said anything, so I'm just trying to get from you.
He told me that he was working on this case. That's what he told me. But I don't recall anything else in the conversation specifically about it. Because I made clear to him that I wasn't going to talk to him about it.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination, Mr. Lewis.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning.
If I'm not speaking loudly enough, please let me know. I don't want to shout at anybody.
I was.
Thank you.
What's your name?
Chip Lewis. Pardon me for not introducing myself. I try to be succinct on the heels of Mr. Lewis from Durst nature, so pardon me.
Well, that was mean, Chip.
Well, it's true.
I didn't say it was untrue. I just said it to me.
Fair enough. You get a twist of baseball. Ma'am, I want to ask you just a few questions. First of all, about your relationship with Miss Berman. I believe you stated that y'all had been friends for approximately 30 years.
I did.
You were such close friends that she made the decision to name you executor of her will.
That's correct.
Now, a lot of this you touched on, but I'm just going to drill down on it just for a few minutes. It's fair to say Miss Berman was a rather dramatic lady.
Dramatic?
Yes, ma'am.
That's very fair to say.
In fact, some of the times when she would reach out to you and get you in one of those hour-long conversations, she would talk about a problem that she was having, and her answer was going to be to get in the bathtub with a hairdryer.
That's correct.
And as time went by, she had what turned out to be, in your impression, rightfully so, I believe.
As time went by, I didn't hear anything after that.
As time went by, there were other episodes that elevated themselves to the fact that she was, in your opinion, truly suicidal.
Now and then she could be, I felt that she may have been.
And in fact, as that very good friend that you were to her, you flew her to New York in one of those times to help her with that, one of those episodes.
Yes.
And in fairness, I know that you're not a medical doctor, I'm not asking for that, but based on your knowledge of her and others, would you say that she was clinically depressed?
No, I didn't think that.
How would you characterize her other than suicidal in those episodes, or specifically New York?
You mean, what was she like? And
Yes,
she
ma'am.
wasn't. I would not characterize her as suicidal, except now and then she did talk about possibly killing herself because her situation was so bad. How I would characterize her otherwise is, yes, she was very emotional and dramatic, and she was extremely complex, and she was a really good friend to the people that she loved.
We're back in session. Our witness is resumed. The witness stand, Ms. Smith, you remain under oath. And Mr. Lewis, you continue with your cross-examination, and Mr. Durst is present with counsel that you will represent.
Afternoon. Now, you talked about your conversations, relationship with Mr. Chapin. Do you recall that?
I did take
I'm sorry. You recall you had previously testified about your relationship, your conversations with Mr. Chapin, Nick
With
Chapin.
Nick Chapin, yes.
Now, I believe you testified to this in response to Mr. Lewin's question, but I want to make sure I got it correct. The New York Times article comes out relative to Westchester County reinitiating the investigation into Kathy's disappearance. You recall?
I do.
You read the article?
I did.
You called Susan.
I must have. One was called the other.
Fair enough. You had a conversation about the article.
Yes.
And all she would say to you about that article was, "Oh, Julie, it's terrible what they are trying to do to Bobby."
That's correct.
You have described Ms. Berman, based on your very long-term relationship, as one of the most loyal friends you could ever have.
She was.
And you have also testified that she would never betray Bob.
I don't believe she would have.
She certainly would never have ratted on Bob to the police, which,
I didn't hear the last few words after ratted on Bob.
to the police.
To the police. Of course not.
And she most definitely wouldn't tell others that she was going to rat on Bob to the police, would she?
I think she would if they were also, no. Okay, let me just see if I can follow the question. You're postulating that she is going to rat on Bob.
No.
Would she tell somebody?
No, you answered the
In that
question.
situation.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on your answer.
I beg your pardon?
I didn't mean to talk over you, I'm sorry.
I don't. Can you ask the question again?
Do you know whether or not David Berman left a trust for Susan and her mom?
I don't know that.
Thank you, ma'am. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect present.
A moment ago, you were asked a question by Mr. Lewis. and you then, in response, said you wanted to clarify and make sure you understood what he was asking you. Do you still have a need at this point to clarify that?
Yes, I didn't understand the question.
Susan Berman would never betray Bob, correct?
Can you repeat that, please?
Susan Berman would never betray Bob, correct?
I felt that way, yes.
She certainly would never have ratted on Bob to the police, correct?
Yes.
And the third question was, she most definitely wouldn't have told other friends that she was going to rat on Bob.
Yeah, that's one I didn't understand. I don't believe she would have.
Ma'am, you've been asked questions about Susan's relationship with Bob Durst and regarding how loyal she is. Do you recall those series of questions?
Yes.
Ma'am, in terms of Susan's loyalty, knowing who Susan is, can you imagine, given Susan's relationship with Bob, that she would lie to protect him?
Yes, I think she would do that.
I want to go the other way. Can you come up with a scenario where Susan Berman would have told individuals that Bob Durst had done something criminal, something extremely serious, if in fact that wasn't true? Ma'am, so let me get this question so it's clear on the record here. You testified that you can imagine Susan Berman lying to protect Bob Durst, correct?
That is correct.
Now I'm asking you, can you imagine Susan Berman lying to incriminate him?
No.
And can you explain why?
Why would she do that? She was his friend.
So, ma'am, in your opinion, and knowing Susan, does the fact that she did not tell you, ever mention to you, having falsely lied for Bob Durst, if that occurred, does that surprise you?
No, that's how she would behave.
But, ma'am, if it turned out that, in fact, she had told other friends that Bob Durst had done something criminal, and it wasn't true, how much would that surprise or shock you?
If it wasn't true.
Yes, if it wasn't true.
That would surprise me very much because she was very loyal to him.
So now, Mrs. Bear, then again, you can see her lying to protect him, but you can't see her lying to incriminate him.
That's right.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Nothing further, Your Honor. No objection.
May this witness be excused?
Yes.
Yes, you're excused, ma'am. Thank you.
Mr. Anderson, exhibit?
Mark, it's 261B. It's a two-page exhibit sheet documenting the 5 exhibits used in the testimony of Julie Smith. Mark, 261C. It's a two-page transcript, which was People's 112A in the video. Mark, 261D. It's a two-page transcript, which was People's 113A in the video. Mark, 261E. Two-page transcript, which was People's 114A in the video. Mark, People's 261F. Two-page transcript, which was People's 116A in the video. Finally, mark People's 261G, two-page transcript. That was People's 117A in the video.
Thank you. Let's take our recess until 10:40. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. 10:40. Let's give it just short of